Well, 4:30 in the morning, just finishing my cup of coffee. Time to head out. I can hear the wind whistling through the trees. The cold air is shooting up my nose. It's a good feeling. I can smell the decaying leaves. It always brings back fond memories of your hunting seasons every year. Looking forward to maybe some snow. A little crust from the cold air this morning. The leaves are a little crunchy yet. We got a little bit of a walk before we get to where we're going to make our first stand this morning. Well, earliest memories. Well, I grew up in Weehawken, New Jersey, and my dad hunted, I guess, as a kid, growing up. He lived on a farm down in Neptune, New Jersey. But he was hunting with a group of guys going to Maine when I grew up, and they'd go every November for 2 weeks up to Maine. And my memories of that is how I so wanted to go. When they left, they used to leave around 10, 11 o'clock at night and drive all night and get up there in the morning. And when they left, it would break my heart that I couldn't go, You always wondered, when am I going to be old enough to go, And hanging out with my dad and his buddies all year long, going to the shooting range and hearing the stories of Maine from the prior year. That built the interest up for me, and really it just, I don't know how to put it. The passion to go hunting was built up from all the time you spent with the guys and the stories they would talk about, and so it builds in you to such a point that you just can't wait for the first time you can go, and I remember the first year I was able to go was 1970, and never forget. I can remember it like it was yesterday. They had my dad had taken the '68 Buick up, and two of his buddies, Bob and Flavio. They had Flavio's '63 Chevy pickup, baby blue. And I sat in the middle between Bob and Flavio, and those two guys, they were some of my biggest inspiration as far as going to Maine, and that fire that built up in me to go and hunt, And I say it's a memory that's burned in my head that I'll never forget. So the first time I finally got where I was old enough or mature enough to go, maybe I guess you might call it, Um, Part of the time I rode up with Bob and Flavio, and we stopped at an old diner set back off the road in Massachusetts. We sat down, and my dad asked me, "Go, what do you want for breakfast?" Next thing you know it, we had plates of pancakes thrown in front of us. He goes, "Well, I guess you're going to eat pancakes this morning." They just threw them right in front of us, and that's the way it went. Funny how those memories are. And but we get up there, and the guys my dad hunted with, um, there was, let's see, I'll try and count as I think it was Flavio, Bob, Petey, Vigalo, and Benny, and my dad. So when he was bringing me along this first time, he decided to rent a camp by himself for me and his best buddy Danny Barr. And Bob and their group, they stayed at a different camp. So when we got up there and we went to Jack's store, that's the only store in town, you might say, and most of those little towns all have a little store that the community is based around. And we got there, and Jack says, "Where you guys staying?" And my dad said, "We're at Camp Popeye." And Jack says, "Yeah, well, it's all ready to go for you." Asked about where Bob and them guys were staying. They said they were staying up at the Three Musketeers up on the mountain. And Jack says, "Well, I got some bad news. That camp's been sold." So they had no place to go. They finally found a place they could stay for the week, and so that was the first time being there and getting to see the place. It was, you always have a picture in your mind what things are going to look like when you get to them before you ever get there, and then when you get there, it's totally different than what you imagine. My first shot at a deer, well, say the first morning out, like I said before, I had gotten my rifle the Christmas prior, year before, 1969. I got a Remington 742 semi-automatic, and the first day out, we take our Jeep up to the woods to where we're going to go into the woods. And my dad says, "All right, be nice and quiet now. Don't slam the door on the Jeep. When you load your gun, don't let the bolt make a lot of noise when you hold it, so it doesn't make a lot of noise when we get it, getting ready to go into the woods." So I did that. I held the action and let it go until it stopped. And so I get on my stand, and he sits me on a rock, big rock. And back then we used to use wool blankets to sit on. And he says, "Here comes all the stories I remember growing up starts going through your head. And he says, "You don't move. When you sit there, you don't move. Don't do any moving." So I tell you what, I think I sat there. I never moved my feet except my eyes maybe. And then all of a sudden I hear this crunching sound. And with that, my heart starts pounding. Here. And it's getting louder and closer and closer. And your ears start to feel like radar dishes. It feels like they're the size of an elephant ear, trying to hear where the noise is coming. And your eyes are as big as an owl's eyes, and trying to see something move. And you don't want to move your body, but yet you're trying to see what's making that noise. And in your head, you're thinking, hopefully it's a deer. It's my chance at a deer. And finally, I see a movement in front of me, and it's a buck, and it's coming straight at me. And so I try to get my gun up, moving as slow as possible, and trying to watch that deer come up and moving slow and slow. And I get it up, and I can see it in the scope, but he's coming straight on. Now, here's what I was saying about the stories that you heard all your life. He always told me, never shoot the deer straight on. Always wait till he turns sideways. Shoot right behind the shoulder. So here's a deer at 25 yards, maybe, if that, and he's coming straight at me. And so I've got a clear view of this deer, and I'm counting the points on the deer, and it's a 10-point buck for my first deer ever in the woods to see out hunting. And I'm like, he's getting closer and closer, and he's at like 15 yards from me, and he's still straight on. I'm like, if I don't shoot him now, he's going to walk into the barrel of a gun. And so I said, well, I got no other choice. So I try to pull the trigger, and nothing happens. And then here we go, back to another story that my dad told me when he was up hunting. The story was, he was going up a hill, and he got to the top of the hill, and he heard a deer coming. He heard the crunching of a deer, and he stopped behind the tree. When the deer appeared, he put the gun up, and he realized he didn't put the safety off on the gun yet. So as he pushed the safety, it clicked. And with that, the deer turned her and jumped and never got a shot at the deer. So now I'm thinking, maybe that's my problem. I didn't put the safety off on the gun. And he said, so when you move the safety, put your fingers on both sides of the safety so it doesn't make that click noise when you move it from one side to the other. So I put my fingers underneath there, and I tried to push the safety to the left, and it didn't go anywhere. So I'm like, well, maybe it's got to go to the right. Being a new hunter, I'm not familiar with which way the safety's supposed to be. So I push it back to the right side, and I try to pull the trigger again, and nothing. In the meantime, the deer was there closer than 15 yards, standing there straight at me. I get frustrated, and I pushed it back to the left, and it went click. The deer looked up and bounded off like, and it was, the action wasn't all the way in. Being a new gun, it was still stiff. You know, it's not like it was worn in where it's nice and smooth. By me holding that action that morning, going into the woods before we went into the woods there, and holding it back, it never gave it enough spring to go in and lock so the gun wouldn't fire. And that was my first episode of deer hunting. So, you know, when we tell stories like this, it brings back, it makes you think of another story that happened with somebody else in the camp, you know. And when you're reliving these times that you're out there, we all can relate to our situations that we have out hunting. So it brings me to a story when my dad really never shot a big buck in his life. He's passed now. But the biggest buck he had a shot at was right there in Maine, and that brings me back in time where, like I say, we didn't find that big buck I had shot. So what it makes me think about is that the day my dad shot a big buck, and we went down there in the morning after he shot and to go track it. And we get down to where he was, where we shot that deer, and we find his one and only coat I'd never seen before, his yellow Woolrich coat, and his gun sitting on a tree like that. And my dad wasn't around. So my dad's buddy Danny, he goes, well, your dad must be tracking a deer. I said, yeah, I guess. He goes, well, we'll grab his gun and coat and we'll go down to the camp and we'll wait for him down there. So we go down to the camp, and we had a little breakfast and that, and Danny says to me, he goes, well, I don't know where the heck your old man is. You know, it's been how long already, you know, since we've been back. And a short time passes after that. Next thing you know it, my dad, I hear him come up the front steps of the camp onto the deck there. And he comes in, and he's like can't believe it. I'm like, uh-oh. This was the second year that I hunted in Maine. That was 1971. And he says, because I can't believe this deer is going still. And like I say, me being still a new hunter, only 2 years hunting, this is actually his second year hunting, I didn't understand really what he was getting at, but I learned. And he says, I tracked that deer, I caught up to him 3 times. And he said, where he laid down, and there's a puddle of blood where he laid and bled out 3 different places. He says, I tracked him to the back up on top of the ridge here behind the camp. And I said, I jumped him again. He said, that's it, let him go lay down. He said, I'll come down and see you guys and we'll go look for him after. We'll give him time to pass. So he sat down there and telling us exactly what happened that day, and the deer come up on him, and the deer was walking away from him, and so he didn't really like the shot. And this comes back to what he said to me about make sure you shoot the deer broadside. The deer never gave him a broadside shot, and it was going away from him. So it was more quartering away, and he took that shot quartering away, and the deer took off after the shot. He took a second shot, and what he found out, he had hit him in the hind quarters with the second shot. And so like I said, then he went to track the deer, and like I said, so now we're at the camp he's having his breakfast. So I guess it was probably around noontime. He said, well, let's go see if we can find this deer. So then he took us back, and he went from the beginning where we first shot the deer. There was a big piece of meat and hair where he hit him with the second shot. It was a moving shot. The deer was running, and like I say, he figures he hit him in the back and the hind. And then he took us to the 3 spots where the deer laid down, and I got pictures in my photo album still today of where the deer's puddles of blood was thick, like jelly congealed out, and just blood sprayed on the ground where as he ran, these big sprays of blood. And we got back and we tracked that deer until about 3 o'clock that afternoon. We were down to little spots of blood that were maybe the size of a sesame seed, and that deer went all the way back over the mountain going towards Gordon Plog's house. And at that point my dad said, we jumped him once when we were tracking with him, and my dad said to me and Danny, goes, all right, let's give it up. And I was like, what do you mean give it up? At that point, I'm like, I didn't think you ever gave up until you found it. You know what I mean? But we were having such a hard time finding the little specks of blood to keep tracking this deer. And my dad said, you know what, you guys got to go out and hunt. It's getting that time to go out and sit for the evening sit. And he said, we'll call it off. And that shook me. I couldn't accept he was willing to give up on that deer. And we went out and hunted that night. He never got the big buck. And I swore at that point I'd learn to track and not give up until I had to on an animal. I think I do a damn good job of tracking animals, and it was all because of that deer with my dad.